Okay, welcome to the video. SIG Guy here, and I am super excited about doing this video finally. The P322 has actually become one of my favorite SIGs, believe it or not. I mean, who would have thought of 22, right? But mine has been an absolute champ. Suppressed and unsuppressed, this thing is so much fun to shoot with a suppressor on it. It's like movie quiet, so I want to do a video on it finally, and what I want to talk about is all the stuff that it comes with from the factory, and then we're going to talk about some of the design features, what makes this more reliable than most other 22s out there. And then we're going to talk about how to install some of the accessories. And then in the end, we'll talk about complete disassembly and reassembly of the 322, okay? And that's the reason why this video has taken so long. I've been debating on whether doing that or not because the parts in here, you can't get replacements. So if you damage something or lose something, you're kind of screwed. But I wanted to do a deep cleaning on mine. That's why I took it apart, because the 22s notoriously run just so dirty. Especially suppressed. The thing gets nasty in there. So I know there's some other people that probably want to do a deep cleaning as well. So that portion of the video, do at your own risk. I don't recommend it, but as of today, it's still a free country. So let's get started. So let's talk about what comes with the pistol from the factory. Obviously, it's wrapped in a blue bag, soaking wet with lubrication. And while we're talking about that, once you get it home, take it out of the bag, you're going to want to do a basic field strip. You're going to remove all of that lubrication and assembly lube, and then you lube it with whatever you're using, your Tetra grease or your oil or whatever, before going to the range, okay? So that's always the first thing when you get a brand new pistol. Do a thorough cleaning, lubrication, and then go bring it to the range, okay? So we got the pistol here. It does not come with an optic. Obviously, I got a green dot installed here. Somewhere there is the green dot. It does come with a rear adjustable fiber optic sight. It's got a fiber optic front sight. So we got the pistol. Comes with two 20-round magazines. Okay, you can get more than 20 in here if you take your time and stack them in there properly, but not recommended by SIG. So two 20-round magazines. We got the loader for the magazines, which helps pull down on those little nubs there for the follower. That was kind of nice to SIG to throw that in there. We got two different trigger styles. We got the curved trigger and the flat trigger. We'll show you how to install these afterwards. They just pop right off and snap back on there. Comes with your Allen wrench, 1.3 millimeter Allen wrench for your sights. You can remove this front sight using an Allen wrench. The same thing with the rear one. That's pretty nifty. You ain't got to use a pusher. Comes with a threaded barrel adapter. Okay, so this is a threaded barrel. It is suppressor ready. It's right-handed 1/2 by 28 threads. Okay, so we're going to show you how to properly install that after. And then under here we got the other stuff. You got your lock, your swag, the bag, your tag that goes around your trigger guard. Okay, so that's pretty much everything that comes with the SIG. Next we'll talk about the features that make this a reliable 22. As always, anytime we're working on a firearm, we're going to make sure it's a clear and safe firearm. So if we got a magazine installed, we're going to remove our magazine. We're going to lock our slide to the rear. We're going to physically and visually make sure there's no round in the chamber, no magazine. Check our breech face, look away, do the same thing again. Chamber, magazine, breech face. We are working on a clear and safe firearm. So the features that make this a very reliable 22, more reliable than the Mosquito, obviously, and then most other 22s, is we have a fluted chamber, a fixed barrel, and it's hammer fired, okay? So we're going to remove our slide, and I'll show you how to do that on the 322. We're going to lock our slide to the rear. We're going to rotate our takedown lever up all the way, okay? Then we're going to pull it back towards the rear more, unhook it, lift it up, and bring it around the front just like that. All right, so we have an aluminum upper and a poly lower, which is pretty common nowadays. Not the poly lower I'm talking about as far as firearms. And you can see that we have a fixed barrel in here, okay? This part here is part of our frame. Okay, it's all one piece. You'll see that better when we pull it out of the grip module. And our barrel actually just slides straight into that, and it's retained by this roll pin and this other pin, okay? So our barrel does not move at all. So when we have a round chambered, hammer fired, okay, when we pull the trigger and our hammer hits our firing pin, because the barrel is fixed, all that kinetic energy that's transferred from the hammer through the firing pin is applied right to the round itself, okay? So you get more reliable firing pin strikes, okay? So that's part of it right there. We have flutes inside the chamber here. You can't see them right now, but I'll put a picture right up here that shows 5 flutes in there in the chamber. So I've asked quite a few people, and I can't get a 100% guaranteed scientific answer, but if you look at your cases once they're ejected, there's usually five carbon lines around the case that correlate with the flutes in the chamber, okay? So I think what's going on here is once the case, the round goes off, the pressure that's inside the barrel helps with those flutes push the brass out of the chamber, okay? So that's part of it. And then another theory is when your round goes off and that case forms to the size of the chamber, because those flutes are in there, there's less surface tension. And surface tension is basically like suction, if you want to think of it that way, okay? So because those flutes are in there, as the case can come back easier because air is allowed in between the case and the chamber itself, okay? So a combination of both of those things make feeding and extracting very reliable in the 22. And before we get off topic, I'm shooting the Lapua Pistol King. These are subsonics. When I shoot suppressed, I use this. I used the Thunderbolts originally. That's the ones in the green box. I've shot quite a few boxes of that. No problems at all. And then I picked this up at the Pro Shop, SIG Pro Shop, and I've had no problems with this either. So those are the different types of ammo that I'm using. I know some people are having issues. As always, these things are usually ammo picky. I haven't found the case yet with mine. So hopefully if you're having problems, try using those and your problems should be resolved, okay? So we talked about the fixed barrel, the flutes. Hammer fired, we touched on it just a little bit. There is a lot of pressure behind this hammer, okay? Because we got our hammer, which goes down to a strut, which goes down to a spring, a big spring in the back of our grip. It's actually in these tracks inside there. And you'll see that when we disassemble it as well. So this hammer has a lot of power that can transfer or refer it to that firing pin to smash the heck out of that case to get reliable ignition, okay? So the fixed barrel, the flutes, the hammer fired, those are the things that SIG, out of the box, these guys are like way ahead of everybody else. But the Mosquito, everybody's heard horror stories about that. And if you've had one, you've lived those horror stories. This is nothing like that. Excellent job by SIG Sauer with this 22. While we have our upper removed, we'll just talk about the sights really quick. We're not going to disassemble our upper because there's really no need to. It does not get that dirty at all. You can use a brushing, get what's dirty inside here, and call it good. But our front sight, if you got to remove and replace the fiber optic portion, basically we're going to use the 1.3 millimeter Allen wrench that SIG supplies with the pistol. And if we look inside here through this hole, we're going to see the 1.3 millimeter screw holding our front sight onto the slide, okay? So we're going to remove that screw, basically the sight will fall off at that point. So that's why we don't need a sight pusher. And the reason why SIG is doing it this way, because don't forget, this is a plastic sight, okay? And normally with the fiber optic, when you put a new one on, they use a little lighter to, melt the ends to keep it from falling out. Well, we don't want to use a lighter on a plastic sight, obviously. So they've got a little pin in here which holds that fiber optic piece in there, okay? So when we remove the screw for our sight's going to come off, and then don't lose that pin. That pin's going to come out of there, and then we can slide the old piece of fiber optic out, cut a new piece to size, put it back in there, make sure it's short enough to where we can get our pin back in there. So we're going to put our pin back in, put our sight back down on our slide, and then put our Allen screw back in there and tighten that to 3 inch-pounds. So in our manual, it's all on page 77, okay, and the rear sight is actually the page before that, I believe. It talks all about our rear sight. And while we're talking about our owner's manual, we can get an owner's manual with a 22, but we can't get an owner's manual with our 226 X5. Come on. You could buy 10 of these for the price of that gun or whatever, so I don't know. I like the owner's manuals because they usually have the diagrams in the back. This one does not, however. It does have a couple diagrams in there, but not exploded view diagrams, which I like because then everybody knows what everything is called, and it usually gives you maybe part numbers and stuff too. So I love the owner's manuals. The 226, yeah, it has it online, but I like to have it with the gun. So anyway, that Allen wrench works for the rear sight as well. So there you have it. To remove this part here, I'm guessing we just knock this roll pin out, and then we can remove that piece. And in there you got your firing pin, your extractor, and then your firing pin safety, and whatever else they got going on in there. So there's the upper. That's about all we're going to talk about that. Let's move on to the trigger shoes themselves. Next, we'll talk about our trigger shoes, but first we got to reinstall our upper to our lower. So in order to do this, we make sure our takedown lever is all the way forward. Sometimes if you're having a hard time getting this back together, you'll notice that your takedown lever isn't all the way forward. It's kind of like that. For whatever reason, it likes to be there. Just make sure it's all the way forward. And your hammer has to be all the way back. So hammer back, takedown lever forward. We'll hook on our front just like this. We're going to pull it back, set it down, bring it forward, rotate our takedown lever. And then we're going to ensure that we are still safe, which we are. And then we'll pull our trigger. Okay? So that's how we reinstall the upper. While we're talking about pulling the trigger and everything, let's talk about our dry fire really quick, okay? Now, SIG advertises that you can dry fire the hell out of this thing and it won't cause any damage, but there's a special way they want you to do that. They include this chamber flag, and you can see it's kind of a little bit different than most chamber flags. What we're going to do is we're going to install our chamber flag just like that and release our slide, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this portion of it here, and we're going to rotate it all the way around until we feel it click in place. Just like that. And now it is captured by the extractor, kind of hooked around it there. And now when we pull it back, it'll stay in place. Okay. So that's pretty cool. And you can see it sounds a lot different than when we fired it before with the hammer smashing into the components inside, okay? So that's the way, it's in your owner's manual as well, that they want you to practice your dry fire with the P322, okay? So we'll remove that for now. And we'll talk about our trigger shoes. We have a flat one and a curved one. These remove pretty easily. All we got to do is push forward on the bottom and it'll unhook just like that. You can see the metal portion of my trigger is actually showing now. We're just going to continue to rotate it forward. And then actually on this, you have to make sure you pull the trigger, okay? The hammer's got to be forward so the trigger's back far enough to where you have enough room to get this in and out of there, okay? So we're going to pull our trigger shoe out and down. We're going to unhook it from there, pull it right out. You can see it's kind of got two tracks in there. Those correlate with the two blades on here. And then as you can see here, Armory Craft has their aluminum adjustable trigger. Okay, it's got an adjustment screw here. And then these two other screws keep it in place. Basically, we're going to install that the same way. Put it up in there just like that. Run these two screws in there, and that'll keep that from going anywhere. And then you can adjust your... I got a video on YouTube on how to adjust the pre-travel screw there, okay? So that's how the Armory Craft one goes on there. Huge improvement. I mean, it's aluminum. It's got this nice texture on the front. The serration's there, and then it's got a wider surface for more real estate for your fingertip there. But it gets rid of that plasticky feel of the 22, which makes a huge improvement on this pistol. So we'll reinstall our flat one just so you can kind of see how it goes back on there. Again, we're going to put the aluminum portion in between the plastic portion. We're going to kind of slide it up, keep rotating it up as you're pushing it up. Push up and back, and you'll feel it click into place, okay? And you can kind of test fire it, make sure it works fine. And there you have it. That's how to replace the trigger shoes on the 322. Let's talk about the threaded barrel next. Okay, so let's talk about our threaded adapter. Again, in our owner's manual on page 60, all the information is there. 7/16 wrench to remove the threaded protector that's on there now. 9/16 wrench to tighten up and remove your adapter. And then 45 inch-pound is the spec for tightening this stuff, okay? Which is a little problem with that, but we'll go over that in a second. So what they want you to do is basically lock your slide to the rear, put your chamber flag in there, and then set it up just like this, okay? That puts the slide back out of the way a little bit, and it gives you access to your threaded protector. Then they want you to use a regular vise, not one like this, but a bench vise, and they want you to put your pistol in here however way you want to do it. I'm just trying to try to do this so you guys can see it easy. And make sure that you're not crushing your takedown lever or any of the other controls, okay? So you basically fix that into your vise like that. We're going to use our 7/16 wrench, okay? And we're going to break that loose. Now, This is regular threads, okay? So righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. And I know I have a problem with it too, especially like flash hiders and stuff like that come from the factory. They jack those things right on there, and you never know if you're going the right way or not. I remember when I first took this off, it was the same thing. So we're going to do this lefty-loosey just like any other nut and bolt, okay? So there's tightened up. We're going to basically put our wrench on there. You got to kind of put it in from the side and make sure that if it does go in straight in and you're loosening it or tightening it, you're not damaging the polymer frame, okay? So off to the edge a little bit, break it loose, and then that threads off pretty easily by hand. So we'll remove our thread protector. And then here's our adapter. Okay, right-handed threads, 1/2 by 28, standard righty-tighty, lefty-loosey threads, okay? So we're going to put that on there. And now this has the flats on it just like our thread protector, okay? I wish SIG would use a hex or something where you can use a socket or a boxed-in wrench on this stuff, because the torque spec was 45 inch-pounds, okay, using a 9/16 wrench. Most people don't have that set up to where they can put a torque wrench, you know, on their wrench. You use a socket on a torque wrench. Well, good luck getting a socket on here. Does not work. Stupid design. So anyway, what I did was I just kind of snugged this up. And again, when you're tightening this, you want to, luckily the adapter's further than the polymer portion, so you don't have to worry as much about damaging your polymer as you're tightening that up, okay? So you want to give that a nice snug turn there. If you have the special wrenches, if you want to call it that have the square hole in it for a torque wrench to torque that to 45 inch-pounds, then that's what you're going to want to do, okay? Then we're going to put that slide back to the rear. We're going to remove our chamber flag. Obviously that went forward. And now you can thread your 1/2 by 28 thread pitch suppressor on there, just like that. Okay. One other thing I want to mention, this is a single action only pistol, SAO, okay? So for that reason, we have a manual safety here. You can't apply it right now because the hammer isn't in the rearward position. So because it's single action only, the very first trigger pull, the slide has to be racked, which means the hammer is in the rearward position, okay? Right now, the hammer's forward, so it won't do anything. So I rack my slide to the rear, and we're going to visually make sure we're clear still. So I rack my slide to the rear. Now my hammer's in the rearward position. Now I can apply my manual safety. Okay. To me, this safety, I don't think I trust it 100%. Okay. It feels it's plastic. Don't forget, most of all this stuff. I know the trigger itself and the trigger bar and the parts in there aren't plastic, but it's got a very squishy, plasticky feel. Okay. And it's because the trigger bar is basically a rod instead of a flat piece of metal. Probably bending and moving around has a lot to do with it, but I'm not going to carry this around in this configuration, and whatever this is pointing at, I'm going to bet with whatever it's pointing at that my safety is going to work. I'm not going to do that. So just err on the side of caution is all I'm saying here. But I just wanted to mention the fact that it is a single action only and it has a manual safety. Okay. So finally, moving into the portion of the video that I find exciting is the disassembly and reassembly of our P322 lower, okay? Before I go into anything, what I want to state here is do this at your own risk. I am not encouraging you to do this. I am not advocating for you to doing this. I'm not saying that you should do this. I would actually try to change your mind from doing this, okay? Reason why is because there's parts in here. None of them are. There's some parts available, but most of these other parts not available at all. Okay, not yet. I don't know if they're going to be out on the part shopper or not. So if you do lose something, you're screwed. Okay, so that reason, and I'm a certified armor from SIG. I went to SIG and did all their programs. Not on the 322 because they haven't come out with that yet. But I'm not encouraging people that don't know what the heck they're doing. I'm not saying, hey, take apart your pistol and then put it back together. And if an accident happens because you reassembled it incorrectly, I don't need that liability. So a gunsmith should be doing this stuff. Someone that's certified on firearms should be doing this kind of thing, okay? So having said that, If you want to help your guy along, you're a certified gunsmith, to show him how to do this, I'm going to show you how to do that today, okay? So, helpful tools. Armor's block. Have this baby since day one. You can see I've actually modified this post here for the 320 strikers, removing the springs and the cups and stuff. So an armor's block. If you don't have an armor's block, a roll of painter's tape or masking tape or whatever will work perfectly fine if you don't have an armor's block. A little hammer. There's an armor's hammer here. It's got Delrin on one end. It's got brass on the other end. It's probably not even really brass, but definitely very helpful. Pair of tweezers. A little spring inside here is very difficult to get back in there with your hands if you got bigger fingers and stuff like that. So tweezers are definitely very helpful. The punch I'm using today is a 7/60 force punch. Whatever gets these pins in and out of there. This one here is the biggest one that I've found that goes in and out of there. So I would say 7/60 force. You don't really want smaller because then it's going to start going inside the roll pins, which you don't want. I have this other punch here. This one actually has a hole in the bottom. You put it over the pins when you're reinstalling them. It keeps your punch from going off the sides and marking up whatever you're putting the pins in. Not 100% necessary, but does make the job easier. And then these other tools here on my website, sigguy.com, I have all the different tool kits on there, okay? And this is the deluxe disassembly and reassembly kit. So out of all the tool kits on there, this has one of everything in it, okay? So you don't need to buy all the other, you don't need the one for the 320, the one for the classic, the one for the 365. If you buy the deluxe kit, it comes with everything in all those kits, okay? If you want to spend a little bit less and just get the 365 one because you don't have a 320 or a classic, then that's fine. That's why I put those other kits together as well, okay? So in this kit, we have a punch right here, little punch here, and this is specific for the 365. We're not going to use this today because it's a little bit too narrow here to knock these pins out, but that realigns the sear spring in the 365, but that is in the kit. We're not going to need that today. We have this 90-degree pick, which is right here. We're going to be using that today. We have a sear spring screwdriver. Okay. This one's got a special end on it there. It's got the little notch in it, which makes installing springs and removing springs very easy. It's got a magnetic end on the other end as well. So that's the sear spring screwdriver, which is in this kit. And then also in this kit, we have 3 different size pin alignment tools. A small, medium, and a large. You get to choose your colors of whatever handles you want out of 11 different colors on the website. For the 322, we're going to be using the small one. Okay. SG on one side, SM on the other side, my logo in the middle. So the small one we're going to be using on the 322, and the large one. Same thing. Large, SG, SG, large pin. It comes with a medium in this kit. That's for the 320. We're not going to be using that today, so we can set that aside. 45-degree pick. I had this left over from the other old kits. I still have one of those, which I find helpful. Not necessary to do this. And a flashlight. If your eyes are getting pretty old, some of the stuff is very hard to see in there. And probably most important is this guy right here. Okay, so I got this off of Amazon. It's like a suction cup vise you can put right on your table, okay? But I use this, it's like a third hand, okay? So when we take this apart, when we're reassembling stuff, the frame, it's a lot easier if you can put that in a little vise. This has got nice rubber coating on here, so we're not marring up anything. And I actually use somewhere here, I got a piece of t-shirt that I put in there sometimes, so even the rubber isn't on the slides and stuff. But that makes it very easy to reassemble all this stuff. If that's holding on to the frame itself, okay? So that's kind of what you're going to need. Not 100% necessary on all this stuff, but it is going to make the job a lot easier. So with that, let's get started with disassembly of the P322. So we'll start with removing our upper, which we already showed you how to do. Lock our slides to the rear. We're going to rotate our takedown lever all the way up. And then we're going to pull this back, lift it up, slide it off, okay? So we got to deal with this recoil spring. Okay, so there's 2 different ways you can do this recoil spring. You can either pull it back with your hands, undo your threaded protector, and then remove this bushing. Or when it's assembled like this, we can remove our thread protector Set that aside and then release our slide, but hang on to it because there's nothing going to be stopping it. Oops, we're going to pull it back, lift up, come forward with it. Okay. And then there's our spring. And then there's that little bushing on the inside there. Make sure we don't lose that. Okay. So this bushing is available. And a new recoil spring is available. And I'll have those on sigguy.com here shortly. Okay. I got a ton of small parts. I have made a huge investment in SIG small parts for all 320s, 365s, and the classics. Okay. So most all the small parts you can find right on sigguy.com. I'll be adding the 322 stuff. Okay. So what I want to mention also is it is best right now to just put down your 322 and watch the rest of this video all the way through. Okay. That way you understand what's coming up. You understand what's going to happen before it happens. You're not losing parts like it fell out on the ground before I had a chance to tell you, hey, there's a little part in there. You're going to expect all that stuff. So watch it all the way through. Even once or twice would be good. You know what I'm saying? That way there's no surprises. So let's move on to removing our frame from our grip module. So let's get started. We'll remove our frame assembly from our grip module. It's held in by these two roll pins right here, okay? So this front one's pretty easy to get out. It just goes through a plastic piece on the inside. You can kind of see it going through that middle there. The other one's got a little bit of tension behind it because of our strut and our spring. And a lot of times your hammer's like that right now. So basically you're going to rotate your takedown lever down and relieve that tension by having the hammer in the forward position, okay? That makes it a lot easier for disassembly and reassembly, okay? So we're going to use our 7/64 punch. We're going to set this on our armorer's block. And a lot of times you can push this front one out by hand, just like that. If it's hasn't been out yet, it might be a little bit more stiff in there. So we're going to use our punch. And we're going to drift out that front one. Just be careful with this one as I mentioned before, it goes through this piece of plastic in the center. So if your punch gets off center, you could actually be going above that hole or below that hole or to the left or the right. Just make sure you're going in a straight motion, straight direction, right through that center, okay? So there's our first roll pin, just a regular roll pin. We'll set that up here. And then this back one, like I said, there's a little bit of tension on here, so we're going to want to line up that hole or the pin with a hole in our block. Get our punch started. And we'll give that a couple taps and get it started, okay? And then what I do is I kind of squish these together because as that pin's coming out, this is going to want to start coming out crooked, okay? And the same as the front hole, we want to make sure that we're going straight through here, pushing that pin out. We're not crooked like that, hitting the side of our grip module on this other part and damaging our grip module. So anyway, as we got that in there, you can actually see how it wants to, it's crooked right now. But if I push it in, see how that punch moves direct or changes direction. So I'm going to squeeze this like that, line up my pin with the hole in my block, and then just knock that the rest of the way through. Just like that. And that is a roll pin just like the front one. They're identical. Mine seems to be a little bit more tapered, this one here. So because this pin's a little bit more difficult to put in, I actually use the one with the more taper to get it started. It makes it a lot easier, okay? But they're identical other than that. And we're going to keep pressure on this as we pull our punch out because, like I said, it is a little bit spring-loaded. And what I usually do before I take anything apart, okay, I still have these on my phone. I take videos of everything. I take my phone, I zoom in as close as I can, video, and I not take pictures, take video because there's a video's like a million pictures, you know. So just take really slow video, all different angles, all around it, all different positions, inside, outside, left, right, you know, so that way, if you're not sure how something goes back together, you can refer to the video. It saves a ton of time and a lot of guesswork. Okay, so highly recommend at every stage of taking this apart, you take videos. Okay, so we're going to hold it just like this, and we're going to pull this straight up and out of there. And the reason why we're holding it like that is because there's some pieces in here that can fall out, and right away you can see our strut. Notice how it's curved like this because it can go in either way. You want to make sure you have the proper orientation of that. And again, you're going to want to take videos of all this stuff after we get done with this grip here. But that might fall off. If it does, it's no big deal. We have some components here in our grip module assembly. This is like a detent for our manual safety. It is spring loaded, so there's a little spring underneath that. Notice the orientation of that as well, because that can go in both ways. And then we have our main spring right down inside this cavity here, okay? So we're going to flip this over. There's our main spring with our little seat for our strut. Put that up here. And I always put these in, I don't know if I mentioned this already, but I put it in order so I have an order to put things back together in. We have this spring here. Don't confuse this spring with the trigger return spring. There's another spring inside here that's similar. And then we have this metal portion here that goes on top of the spring. Okay. So again, I would take my camera out, take video, all kinds of video, and now you can see underneath here, you can see there's a little spring there. There's actually another little spring on this side over here. You can kind of see it right here through the top. Again, really slow video of all this stuff, because a video you can zoom in on. You can pause it, zoom in on it, move the timeline so it goes like really slow. It's super handy. So we'll remove our strut. This just kind of goes up. It's on a little post underneath there. Slides right off, and we'll set that aside as well. It's a lot easier taking things apart if you understand how they interact with each other. So before we go further, this is our strut, like I said, for our hammer. When we reassemble it, it's crucial that we get this strut right into this seat here, okay, just like that. There are slits in our grip module, which I showed you on that picture earlier. And this little guy here wants to kind of go like this and through the slit. Okay, then you ain't gonna be able to get your magazine in. Ask me how I know this. You'll have difficulty. It'll be hitting your magazine. So there's a trick that I learned to put this in there to help the accuracy of getting it into that little seat there when reassembling. Okay, so there's our strut. There's our mainspring, and then our detent. Basically, the little spring goes in the hole just like that, with this shark fin portion facing towards the rear. Okay, so there's those components there. Next, like I said, we're going to deal with our barrel. And now what I want to mention too is it's common practice that anytime you remove roll pins, you replace them with brand new roll pins. Okay, obviously they're not available yet, not from SIG anyway, so take that any way you want to. So we have one more roll pin here. This is a little bit different of a roll pin. It's not the one that's spirally wound. It's kind of the one that looks like a C, and as you push it in there, it kind of collapses like that. So we have one of those, and then just a regular pin here. So I'm going to knock out my roll pin first. And anytime you're working on this, knocking pins in and out, we have our takedown lever here, okay? At this point, you can remove that. So that way it makes this part a little bit more flat, and you're not setting your takedown lever on your armor's block and then hammering and maybe ruining your takedown lever. So to remove the takedown lever, we just put it in the up position, and then we're actually going to pull it towards us. See, I can slide that in and out like that. We're going to pull it towards us, and then it's going to pop, and it's going to come straight out the front. Okay, this little piece behind it is spring loaded. It's got our trigger return spring on the other side of it. So just kind of hang on to this as you're moving it in and out. Come on, baby. Put that back in there, just like that. So we're going to rotate it. We're going to kind of pull it towards us, let the spring kind of push on it, and pull it straight out the front. So that's our takedown lever. Very easy. You can get that right out of the way. Now we can put this on this side. We can put this on that side. I'm going to actually remove my trigger shoe as well. I always feel like I'm going to cut myself with that portion there, but we'll remove that as well, so we ain't got to worry about that either. Okay. So we'll lay it on the side here. We're going to drift this pin out, the forward pin on our barrel, my 7/64 punch. This pin right here. Okay. So put that right on the side. Knock that right through. And this pin, like I said, it's a little bit different than the other roll pins. It's a kind that collapses on itself. So we'll put that right here. Pull our punch out. And then this pin in the rear only comes out one side. So we're going to push it from right to left. Just a regular pin. Okay. Looks like it's tapered on this end right here. That end looks more, it's rounded, but it's not as tapered as this end here. So we're going to make sure that that goes in that way. Okay. So we'll put those together right up here. And then our barrel will slide right out the front. See those two grooves that the pins go through, and that's all that holds that barrel in there. Okay. You can actually maybe see the flutes in there that we were talking about earlier. It's not rifling, that's flutes in the chamber, and then you can see the rifling ahead of that. But that's it. That's all it is to the barrel. Pretty simple. Next, I'm going to remove my slide catch, slide stop, whatever way you want to call it. It's a little spring-loaded there, and the spring is this little itty-bitty one right here. Okay? Don't lose this. Who knows when that'll be available, if ever. But you can see how that little leg is up and over it. So the easiest way to remove this, we don't want to force any of this stuff, okay? Because we don't want to distort the spring or any other parts and pieces. So if you haven't already, stop what you're doing. Take your video all around this stuff, because now we can see a little bit more that we couldn't see before. Okay, take your slow video. The more the merrier. Okay. So anyway, on that there, we're going to use our small pin removal tool. And this pin right here can go out either way. So we're going to push in on that. Just like that. Pull it out this side. Put that pin over here. And this is different than our other pins, even though they look similar. This isn't a roll pin, just a regular pin. And there's a couple of these in here, so they're interchangeable as well. So there's our pin there. We can pull that out. Now, rather than trying to unhook this leg from my slide catch, what I do is I take this side here and rotate it up and over, and then unhook it from the spring, okay? So we're going to pull this up like this, just like that. So I got it kind of going crooked now. I'm going to pull that up, and then you can see it actually just let go of my spring. And we're just going to pull this up and out of there, okay? Didn't force the spring at all, didn't tweak it, didn't bend it. Didn't mess it up at all. So honestly, if I were you, I would probably leave that in there. That way there's less chance of losing it. But I will show you how easy it is to remove. You can kind of pull on this like that. I get it a little bit started to where I can see the back portion, or I can get my pick in there. Kind of start to use it to start to pull that out of there. And then I'm going to use my tweezers to grab onto this, kind of work it the rest of the way out of there. Very tiny spring. Don't lose that. It's a good idea if you got little baggies to put stuff like that in, because some stuff might be magnetized. You don't know. The spring was there a minute ago and now it's gone and you have no idea where it went. Well, it might have got stuck on another part, brought it over the edge of the table. Now it's in the carpet somewhere. But with little stuff like that, I always put it in a baggie, set it to the side. Less likelihood of losing that. But again, I wouldn't even bother taking that out of there. If it started coming out a little bit, I would actually use my pick and just push it back in and kind of leave it there. All right, so talking about the spring again, if you're going to be scrubbing this thing once you get it all apart, or ultrasonic cleaner, or whatever method you're going to use, it might be wise to remove that spring. That way you're not in there with a brush and you accidentally knock it out, okay? So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start disassembling the trigger. The trigger is held in by this pivot pin, which actually holds this insert here with our trigger return spring. And there's a guide in there as well we don't want to lose. That goes to the trigger bar, which is a kind of a wire-shaped trigger bar. And that goes to our sear, our hammer, our safety lever, another spring back here, and then there's one other component in here, and I'm not sure the name of it. It actually works with our safety, but it might be a safety lever for the trigger hammer or whatever. Again, I'm not sure of the name of all these parts yet, as it's relatively new, so forgive me if I'm using the wrong names. So when we more importantly, when we reassemble this and we're working on the rear here, we're going to kind of want to stage the front so the trigger is kind of in it, and there's no tension on the trigger bar, which makes it difficult to get some of this stuff together, okay? So right now we're just going to remove this pin and let our trigger do what it wants to do. It can fall out. It doesn't really matter. And again, we're going to use our small punch. And then be careful, just like with our other pins, make sure you're going right through the center of the trigger. Okay, you really shouldn't have to hammer this. If you do have to hammer it, just make sure you're lined up properly, okay? So just kind of wiggle your punch around. Make sure we're going right through the holes, okay? We're going right through the trigger now, right through the other side of the trigger. You can see how it's kind of crooked now, so it wouldn't really go through the side of the frame, but maybe you're hammering it and it's stuck because it's off center. Just pay particular attention to that, okay? But a lot of these pins you can pull right out by hand once you get them started a little bit. This is the same as that other pin that we took out, so they're interchangeable. And I think this one actually has a little bit more taper for whatever reason, and this is the more difficult pin to put in. So again, I use this pin to go in first. But anyway, just lay everything out. And if you got a particular way you want to orientate your pins, where up is in, or left or right or whatever, that way you put your pins in the exact same way they came out, okay? So we have that in there, and like it's spring loaded, you can see it's kind of pushing on there. So make sure we put our finger over here, we pull our punch out, and then we slowly let this insert relieve the tension there, okay? So we got the insert, a spring, a guide, and our trigger. That's the pieces in here, okay? So you want to just slowly pull out. Anytime you're doing any of this stuff, you want to work really slowly, and you can kind of see right now. Let me get my flashlight. Pay really good attention about how things are interacting with each other. So you can kind of see in there. See the spring in behind that insert. Okay. Take videos, pictures, whatever you want to do. So we're going to pull this insert all the way out. Okay, you can see the spring right there is going to fall out. And what's interesting about our insert is we have this hole up top here with the grease all around it. That's the hole that our spring's going to go back in. Okay. So that's up top. These legs here are at the bottom. So that's interesting. Put that to the side here. We got our spring. Again, taking pictures of all this stuff so you know how it goes back together. See, our spring is on, it's called the trigger return spring guide or something like that. It's a black piece of plastic. I'll show you that here in a second. You can see how the trigger bar goes through both of those components. Okay. So again, take your video and all that stuff. Anyway, the spring comes right out. Slides right off of that guide. You can see it's similar to this other spring here. It's not as heavy duty, but don't mix the two up. There's that one there. And then our trigger, I mean, sometimes it falls out, sometimes it doesn't fall out. But there's that little guide flopping around inside there. Okay. So sometimes you can, don't bend anything, just sometimes you can work this off of there. It's kind of irrelevant. So whatever the case may be, you don't want it to fall off when you're not paying attention, because that little guide, there we go, right there, you don't want to lose that, okay? So basically I pulled my trigger bar up as high as it could go so I can kind of bend this like that, not bend it, but twist it like that and get it off the end there. You don't have to take this off right now, so if you're having a hard time getting that off of there, don't force it. Just be very careful not to lose this guide. This guide is available, so if it does get lost, we're going to get lucky there. When we're reassembling, this guide only goes in one way. I've cleaned all the grease off this stuff pretty much. It was really loaded with a lot of grease, but I took this all apart, cleaned it all up, so the video was a little easier to see what's going on. So when we're reassembling, make sure if you're cleaning, you're reapplying grease and lubricants to the places where you removed it, okay? So this only goes in one way. It's got this little leg or a shelf up top right here. Obviously that has to be up top like this, because we got to line those holes up. Okay, see the hole? So our trigger bar goes through the hole, If you have it upside down, I mean, you can line the holes up, but then there's no way that this has to be in this position for our spring to go back on it. This is the front. It has to go just like that. Okay? So don't lose that piece. Put it in a little baggie if you want. I stick it right in the middle of this wedge with the spring. Usually keep these together. Put our trigger right there. Now that we have everything out of the front, let's start working on the rear. We have 2 pins here, different sizes. The first one we're going to remove is our hammer pivot pin. This is where we use the bigger punch. And this can go out either side. I usually go from right to left on this because there's a spring inside here that is, we're going to bend it down underneath this pin when we reassemble it, okay? So it's got a little bit of spring tension there. So I find it a little bit easier if I come from this side. I'm going to work my pin in there. And we already removed our trigger, so sometimes it's a little bit difficult getting that pin in and out of there. And sometimes it's easier if you can move your trigger forward and backwards. But anyway, we got it out already, so it doesn't really matter. We're going to put our pin in. I'm going to push that all the way through. We're going to pull this out the rest of the way. You can hear it kind of click. That was that spring going down below this pin. So this pin, there are 2 different sides. We have a taper on the one side. We have a flat on this side here. Taper goes, when we reassemble, goes from left to right. So we'll take our pin, we'll set it aside here, and we remove our alignment pin here. Our hammer is going to probably fall out. Okay, just like that. This is our hammer. Pay attention to the direction that it was in. This is the front of our hammer. This is the little post that our strut. Be a good time to show you this. So when we put this back together, it's kind of got it's a pin with a little like nub, like an L shape. So you can't just like slide this straight down on there. You got to kind of put it on an angle and then put it on there and then rotate it down. You can see how that little nub kind of captures our strut to keep it from falling off, okay? So it's not as noticeable when this is all put back together. So just make sure when we're putting this back together, you understand how it works. We're going to rotate our strut up to like the 3 o'clock position, put it over there, and then rotate it back down, and then we'll slide this into the grip assembly when we're all done. Okay, so that's how that works. Put this back here, put this back here. Be very careful because there's one other part in here, and I'm not sure the name of it. It's kind of like a safety lever, but it actually works with our manual safety as well. Okay, it's just a little spacer in here with some notches on it. But that'll fall out here in a minute if it already hasn't fallen out on you. So when you remove your pin here, or before you remove your pin, take your videos all over it, you know what I'm saying? All underneath it and everything. Remove your pin, pull your hammer out, take more video, because what's really important here is the spring inside here. Okay? It's a little spring. Here's the longer leg of it and the orientation of that spring. Okay? So very important. That long leg is up against my manual safety lever. So it's on the outside facing up. That means the short leg is actually towards us, okay, towards the sear side of it. And you'll see that when we pull this apart a lot better. Next, we're going to remove the last pin, which is kind of holding everything in here, okay? We have our manual safety lever, which isn't going to fall out. We have our sear. I'm pretty sure this is going to be called the sear, which our trigger bar goes through, okay? Then we have that little piece here that I was talking about that could fall out. And we have the little spring. So we're going to use our small punch. I'm going to push this right through here. And I'm going to have it like really close to the table, okay? So if something falls out, it doesn't bounce. Okay, I'm just going to pull this. I'm going to actually push my pin all the way through. So we can do this one thing at a time. And here's another pin. Same as our other pin up here. Okay, the first pin we took out for our slide catch. Those are interchangeable as well. So we'll set that down there. And the first thing that you're going to see is, it probably won't fall out because it might be stuck to it, but the first thing that would come out if I pull this pin out is that sear, or the spring right there. Okay? And then we got the sear, and then we have that other little circular shape there. Okay? So we'll pull this out. We'll just let it all fall. Okay? So there's our trigger bar, 2 different ends. Goes in there just like that. This is the front. This is the part that goes through the trigger, through the right-hand side of the trigger if we're looking forward. And then this part goes through our sear on this end. Okay. So there's our trigger bar. Here's this little spring. Do not lose that. I didn't see that available at all anywhere. So again, put it in a baggie. Okay. And then we have our sear assembly, I'm going to call it. I'm not taking this apart. It's 2 pieces with that little spring in there. You can see it kind of actuates. So you got this little pin that's hollow that goes through it, and it kind of locks everything together. Well, I'm not taking that apart. There's no need to take it apart. And I don't want to know how hard it is to put back together. Okay, so we're going to leave that like it is. And then lastly, we have our manual safety lever. This one here, this is the rear. Okay. You're going to rotate it like this to get those loops that the pin goes through up and out of there, and then just kind of pull it up out the top just like that. And there's our other little piece right here. That's the one I worry about losing when we pull that pin out. Okay. I'm not sure what this is. Safety lever. It works with our manual safety. This little leg and our manual safety interacts with it. So when this goes back in, while we have this out, we'll show you this. This is forward, okay? This is away from us, obviously, and that leg is facing away from us. You can see on this piece here, we have this notch, clearly defined notch. We have another little one here in the front, but that clearly defined notch is what actually sits on this leg of our manual safety, okay? And you can see straight through it where the pin would go through it. Pin would go through just like this. Come on. Thought that was going to be easy to demonstrate. So just like that, pins through it. You see how that notch nests this leg on our manual safety lever. So when we put this all back together, that's exactly how that needs to look, okay? And there you go. That's how you completely disassemble the P322, the lower portion anyway. So you should have nothing left in here unless you left that little spring in there. So at this time, basically do a nice thorough cleaning of everything. All these little parts and pieces, do a nice cleaning job on them, especially ones that get a lot of carbon over them in the rear here. And then make sure, I'm not going to lube it when I put this back together, but make sure you're paying attention to where you're removing grease or oil from, so you can reapply that when you reassemble. So give you time to clean all that up. Next, we'll reassemble the P322. Okay, and there you have it. I don't have time to make the rest of this video, so you're going to have to figure out how to put this all back together yourself. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Alright, so you know I'm just messing with you. I wouldn't leave you hanging like that. So when we reassemble this, okay, we're not going to kind of follow the same order. We're going to kind of jump to this section here. We're going to stage our trigger first. And what I mean by that is, if we put all this stuff together in the back with our trigger bar going forward, remember how we were taking our trigger off, we kind of twisted it on the side here and pulled it out as an angle. Well, it's really hard to get it back together like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that together first as an assembly with the trigger bar and everything hooked up to it, and then we'll put on the rear afterwards, okay? So we're going to grab our trigger bar, our trigger, our guide, and we'll temporarily get our pin here. We're going to use our alignment pin here to put it together first. So we take our trigger, take our guide. I'm going to put that in there just like that, okay? Line those holes up. We're going to take our the bigger end of our trigger bar. We're going to put it right through the back side there, just like that. Okay, and this is the front of the pistol. This is the away from us, obviously. So we're going to sneak that whole assembly up, just like that, up through this hole here. This is the hole that our trigger hangs out of. So we're going to kind of go in like this. We're going to start to rotate, make sure it goes down below this bar here. It's got to go below that one and above the one on the bottom, okay? So right in through the back there. Just like that. And then what we got to do is, to get this guide in, we got to kind of rotate the trigger a little bit, get our guide in there, okay? And then I'm kind of pinching my trigger bar to the side of my frame, and gravity's kind of holding the trigger so it does not slip off of my trigger bar. If you have this flipped up the other way, that's going to fall off, okay? So you don't want to do that. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to take my alignment pin, I'm going to put it in through this side here, and then I'm going to go through the hole in the trigger. Just like that. Completely through the other side. Just like that. Okay. And now this is acting like a slave pin. I'm just going to take my trigger bar pin. I'm going to push out my alignment pin with the trigger bar pin. Just like that. Okay. So right now our guide is facing forward. It's in between the trigger itself. Trigger bar is on there, and our pin is installed. Okay, so for now we're going to leave it like that. We're just going to keep an eye on our trigger pivot pin, because sometimes it wants to walk its way out a little bit, which is fine. Just keep pushing it back in. But like, see how it just came out right there? Maybe a piece of painter's tape on both sides would be a lot easier. But anyway, now we ain't got to worry about trying to sneak this in there and possibly distorting anything, the trigger bar itself. It's already assembled. Okay, so I've zoomed pretty close in just so these next steps are just a little easier to see, hopefully. Before we put our manual safety lever in, which is our next step, I want to show you the spring and our sear, how they interact, okay? Because it's going to be a lot easier putting it together if you kind of, in your mind, can visually understand what's going on. So this is the side that our spring goes on, okay? That's the same size as our strut attaches to. The opposite side is the trigger bar hole, okay? So on the side that the spring goes on, this is forward, okay? This is the left side of the gun we're looking at. This spring, the longer leg, so there's a long leg and a short leg. This is the long leg. That's the short leg. The long leg needs to be facing the left side of the pistol, okay, which is going to be towards us. The short leg, obviously, towards the inside. And when we put this spring in there, that is how it needs to go in there, okay? Let me demonstrate something here. So with our pin going through here, so say this is all put together. This is the front of the pistol. This is the left side. This little spring here is the one that went click when we removed that big pin, okay? This one right, I move things around here. This big pin here. Oops. That's our hammer pivot pin, okay? So this little short leg is captured by the molding marks, these nubs in the side of that sear, okay? So when we go to push tension on this, that spring ain't rotating. If it's not in there properly, and say it's like in there like this, now when we go to push on the spring, there's nothing stopping it from rotating around, okay? So you got to make sure that that little leg is in front of those little casting marks. These little casting marks right here. These little nubs. So that spring is pushing against it, okay? So when we go to put our trigger pivot pin in, once all this assembly is in there, what we're going to be doing with our sear spring screwdriver is we're going to be pushing down on this spring, okay? Pushing down on it. See how it doesn't want to go because it's captured properly in here. If you go to push down on this thing, it flops right around. You're not properly seated in here, okay? So anyway, we're going to push this down to make room for our trigger bar, or excuse me, our hammer pivot pin to go above it. It's kind of the same principle as your 365 sear spring. Okay, when that safety lever pin goes through it, you want to push that spring out of the way so the pin can go through it. Well, right now, the spring is going to be like, the zoom is kind of messing me up. It's going to be like halfway on the pin like that. So we need to push the spring down so we can get our pin by it and in, okay? I know it's kind of confusing or whatever at this point, but I just wanted to show you more importantly, because I can't show you once this is all assembled, how this spring properly goes in against that sear like that, okay? All right, so next we're going to put our manual safety lever in there, and I know this is confusing, and that's kind of why I encourage people maybe not to do this. It's not like our 365 or our 320. But it is like those, once you've done it. I mean, I've taken this part like 15 times now. Every single night I would come home, or I wouldn't come home, I'd be finish my work, take it apart really quick, put it back together, put it back in the safe. The next day I did the exact same thing. I did it for like a week straight, over and over and over, just so I could familiarize myself with it. So it's really not that bad once you understand how everything goes together. It's actually, it's as easy as the other ones, but the first time I get it, it's overwhelming, but just have patience. If you got to step away for a minute to kind of get your mind in the right place again, and then come back and try it again, then try it again. Just watch the video and understand what's going on, and there's no way you can mess this up. Anyway, so our manual safety lever, okay, this nub is going to be facing down, the loop's facing towards the rear. This is the rear, and I'm holding my trigger bar up, because this portion of my safety lever needs to go underneath my trigger bar. Okay, right now my trigger bar wants to lay down, and I can clearly put this in there and above my trigger bar, just like that. Well, guess what? Now I can't hook my trigger bar up to my sear, so that's not the way it goes. So we're going to push our trigger bar up, keeping an eye on our pin in there, make sure it doesn't fall out. And then we're going to put this portion in first. We're going to put that underneath our trigger bar. Underneath our trigger bar. Just like, nope. Just like that. Okay, rotate it in underneath it and then just let it fall down in place. So now our trigger bar is above our safety lever, obviously underneath this part. And it wants to like fall right into that little notch right there, which is a pain in the butt to get it out afterwards, but just let it hang out there for now, okay? So next we're gonna have our assistant help us, our vise. So I'm gonna put that right here. We're gonna make sure our trigger pivot pin is still in there where it needs to be. I'm gonna kind of loosely put this in there. Don't need to crank down on it, just enough to hold it, okay? And now we're gonna work on this part right here. Okay, so as I explained previously, this notch portion here needs to straddle that leg on our safety lever. Okay, so the easiest way I've found to put this in is kind of get my alignment pin tool here, get it started. If things aren't all aligned, see, it's the trigger bar. Get that trigger bar out of that notch. There, now we can move this thing freely. Put this right in the hole here. Through our manual safety lever. And I put it in about halfway, okay? So that gives me something to put this on, and slide it on there. So again, these notches, the flat end, the flat side, relatively flat side, is facing that way. Okay, the sides with these nubs and everything facing that way. So I'm going to put this on here just like this. Sink that around onto that pin. You got to use a pair of tweezers or something. That's fine. And then we're going to position it. Let me put this all the way through so it doesn't fall out. Just like that. Grab my flashlight. All right, you can see that little circular piece there, that safety lever or whatever it's going to be called, is straddling this leg here. Okay, and that's where that needs to go. So I'm going to leave that just like that for now. And what we're going to do is, what I do is I take my pin. This is my hammer pivot pin. I'm actually going to put it in there through the opposite side. And I'll explain why in a second. That's going to hold that from falling out, because I need to install this one through this side, and I can't with my large one in the way. Okay, just going to leave that one in there temporarily. The next part I'm going to put in is the sear assembly. Pretty sure that's what it's called. It's going to be funny, in a couple years from now, this video is still going to be on YouTube, and none of this stuff is actually called that, and people are going to say, you're a dumbass. But anyway, so we're going to install this, and as we already explained, this spring is going to go on this side here. Okay, so it actually goes in there just like this. The hook portion facing towards the rear and up. This side over here, we got the hole for our trigger bar, and then our pivot pin goes right there. Okay, so the way that I put this in here is we're going to make sure our trigger bar is up all the way. Okay, then we're just going to kind of sneak this in through the side and just kind of lay it on there. So it's on our trigger bar right now. See, our trigger bar is just kind of going through the hole there. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to slowly push our pin out that we have in here already, just to where we can see it clear our sear on this side right here, right in this gap. So just keep kind of pulling that out. And our sear can kind of drop down into that cavity, just like that, like it wants to be. Okay. We can actually push this all the way in, because we're actually going to pull it out the other side. Because we're going to need to make room for this pin here. And this pin here is going to go the small hole here. Okay, so we're going to put that in through there. We're going to work it in to our sear. Just kind of move things around, get the sear lined up. So we can have it coming out this side here. It's all the way in there, capturing our sear. We can actually go ahead and pull this pin out right here. Okay. As many times as I've done this, that little piece here, it fell out once, and I don't know why it fell out. Maybe I didn't have it together properly, but since then, it's never fallen out. As long as my sear's in there, kind of captures that in there, okay? So we pull that little pin out. All right, so this is the hardest part of this whole operation. Okay, and I'm going to try to be able to show you guys here clearly on camera. So this is the spring we're talking about. We have the long leg and the short leg. We want the long leg facing this side over here. We want the short leg against the sear. And remember how I told you that the short leg has to be captured against that sear so it doesn't rotate. So what I've learned is take the longer leg. You can see the hole for our hammer pivot pin. If I can get this in there without knocking anything off. So that pin I just put in there is where our hammer pivot pin is going. Okay. So that longer leg is basically going to be above this pin, because when we reassemble everything, we're going to have to take that leg and bend it down with the screwdriver and get this pin in there, and then that spring rests right against this pin here, this pin here, our hammer pivot pin. All right, so what I'm getting at here is the longer leg, when we reinstall it, you're going to want it on the bottom side of where the pin would be. If you got it rotated forward like this, okay, past the pin, well, then this leg isn't far enough back to catch the cavity that it needs to be in. That's kind of what the whole purpose of this explanation is, okay? So we're going to remove that. We don't need that in there. And what I do is I grab my tweezers. And first we need to pull out this a little bit, because we got to have room for our spring. Our spring is going to pivot right. This is where our other pin will be, okay, once we remove our pin alignment tool here. So we're going to pull that out just a little bit so we can get enough room in here for our spring. So there's enough room in there for our spring. This is our punch. We pull our punch out just to make enough room for our spring, but not letting go of our sear. Long leg facing away from us and more back than forward. Okay, I'm going to grab my tweezers. Be careful, if you don't have a good pair of tweezers and this leg, the spring slips, it goes like flying across the room. Ask me how I know. So I'm going to set this down in here with the short leg facing like not as far rear as possible, but pretty like almost straight down. Okay, so it's pretty far towards the front of the pistol, actually. I'm going to drop it in here. I'm going to kind of move this around. Just like that. And you can see how my slave pin is going through the spring now. Okay. And actually go all the way through to the other side. So to demonstrate if we're in the right spot or not, what I want you to do is take this spring and try to rotate it. Now the hole for my hammer pivot pin is going to come right through here. It's going to come right through here. And you can see the relation to that spring. The spring is almost covering the hole. Okay. So if I actually take my screwdriver and I push that spring, you can see how that spring is, there's tension on it right now. It's like right in the middle of that hole. Okay, which is perfect. Because when we put the pin through that hole, we're going to use a screwdriver to push down on the spring, push the pin through, and then the spring is going to have some tension against the pin. If your spring is like way over to this side over here, you're not in the right position. And if it's way over to this side over here, you're definitely not in the right position. Okay? So make sure you're orientated. See how that spring is like right in the middle of the hole? If you're right there, you're perfect. Okay, just so you know, we are on the home stretch. That right there is the hardest part of this whole operation, as I'm sure you're figuring out right now. So just pause the video, take as long as you got to take to get that in there correctly, and then come back and we'll continue, okay? So for those of you that are ready, we're going to take our pivot pin, and we're going to push out our alignment pin, being very careful not to let that spring fall out. So I push in on this as I'm pushing harder on the pin to push my slave pin out. Okay. So that's all in. We're all good to go there. Our piece here has not fallen out. It usually doesn't fall out. I think it fell out once, and I'm not sure why, because out of the probably 10 or 12 times I've done this, it never falls out. But just make sure that that's in there still properly. And then we're going to move on to reinstalling our hammer next. Now our hammer, like I mentioned in the beginning, sometimes you're going to have a hard time getting this pin to go through. Getting your pin to go through. You're going to be fighting it with some of this stuff. But if you pull your trigger like this, it moves that sear and it kind of puts some slack in there, I guess you want to call it. And it allows it to line up and go in a lot easier, okay? So our hammer, this flat face goes forward. This is the side for our strut, goes on the left. So it's going to go in there just like that, okay? So what I do on this is I get things prepped. And what I mean by that is I take my pin. Now this had the more of a taper on one side than the other side. The more of the taper end I put in here first. Get it to go through your manual safety. And you can see if your spring is in there properly. See how my pin is pushing up against the spring? That is absolutely perfect. Okay? That is absolutely what you want it to be like. So what's going to happen now is we're going to stage this portion of it. And I'm going to use my sear spring screwdriver. I'm going to push down on that spring while pushing in on my pin. Just like that. So you see how that spring is below the pivot pin now? This pin we just put in? And there's tension on it. So I know it's captured perfectly. If there's no tension on that, then this other side here, it's not interacting with our sear properly, okay? So with that spring in there, I'm going to pull this out as far as possible without letting that spring go, which is pretty much right there, because it's got the taper too. So if you pull it out too far, no problem. Just put the spring down, push it back in, and we want it to be, the pin to be out as far as possible because we got to make room for our hammer to go in. Okay? So what I do on this is I take this one here, put it through this side. Oops. I take this one here, put it in through this side. And what that's going to do is it's going to make sure my manual safety lever is perfectly parallel, basically to the frame. And not like one side's hanging down, one side's hanging up. That way the pin's not going to go straight all the way through it, okay? So now we're going to take our hammer, and I did put this in like this before. And for whatever reason, it wouldn't come far enough forward, so it basically depends on how it interacts with our sear and the notches and everything. So basically, I just kind of have it mostly upright, put it in there. And like I said, if you pull the trigger, you can get this down in there a little easier, and you can get the pin to go through there. It's kind of got to go forward, and that's why we're pulling the trigger. There we go. So I got this one here started. Now I'll push this one in here, and that one's actually pushing this one out. So basically, I know I'm in there perfectly straight. Now, I mean, if you can see, when I push this, it's pushing that one out. And we'll just kind of go all the way through. So the problem I had the first couple times I did this was it was really hard to get this pin in there, okay? Because it's pushing against the sear and everything. So when I pulled my trigger down here in the front, it kind of relieved the tension between the sear and the trigger. Made it, see how I can actually, it's flopping around now? But when it's not, when I'm not pulling the trigger, see how it's tight? Pull the trigger, loose. So if you're having a hard time lining this pin up and getting it to go through, just pull your trigger a little bit to relieve that tension in between the two parts, and that pin will slide right in there. Okay, now that that's all together, we are on the home stretch. That is as difficult as it gets, and that is the reason why most people are not too crazy about even taking that apart, because it's a lot of stuff crammed into a little area. So next, what we're going to do is let's install our trigger completely, so that way this pin doesn't fall out. Let me put these stuff back to where it belongs. So we have our insert here and our trigger return spring. Right now, you really shouldn't have any worries about your trigger falling off of there. If it falls off of there, and you got to do this all over again, God love you. Anyway, so I'm going to pull out my trigger pivot pin, and you can see where my trigger is on the trigger bar. I'm kind of favoring this side over here, keeping my trigger on that trigger bar so it does not fall out. So we'll pull our pin out. Just like that. And then what we're going to need to do is have our guide facing forward for our spring to go on. So we'll take our tweezers, take our spring, put our spring right on our guide, just like that. Kind of center up your trigger a little bit. Make sure your spring is towards the top, okay? Because we're going to want this insert to go, obviously the hole for the trigger return spring is up top here. We want the legs to go underneath. So I'm going to slide that in there, center our trigger, that'll drop in a little bit. And then we're going to fish this around until we get our trigger return spring. And make sure that this pin is out far enough, okay? You can see how I kind of just pushed that spring down in there, and then you saw the insert drop in because that spring's in the hole. And make sure we got some tension there. And we're going to flip it back around like this so we can watch our trigger pivot pin. You got to basically push this insert in far enough to where that pin can pass through it. And then we're going to get the trigger pivot pin to pass through the trigger, through the other side of the trigger, and then through the last portion of our SCU. So it was like the spring was trying to push that pin off center. That's why you don't smack the hell out of it. And then what I did is I grabbed my trigger and kind of twisted it to line up the hole, and it actually just snapped back in place. So just make sure we got spring tension on there. Trigger ain't going anywhere. That part's finished. Okay, next I'm going to put my barrel in. The reason why I'm waiting on these two pieces is because now I can put this on my armorer's block here, and it's nice and flat, and I can bang my pins and stuff without my takedown lever or my slide catch being in the way. Okay, so we're going to insert our barrel, notches facing down. We'll insert it as we're looking through the holes there. We're going to line up those notches with the holes in here. Okay, we're going to take the stainless pin, the solid one, with the tapered end first going in here, and that's going to basically lock our barrel into place, and then we'll drive in our roll pin here. So whatever end looks a little bit more tapered than the other, kind of start that first. And this is where I use the special punch. If you got a regular punch, that's fine too. Put that right over there. Start knocking that in there. Flip it over. Finish it up. And then what I'm going to do is, you can see how it's kind of countersunk on one side. It's flush on that side. I'm going to actually push it in just a little bit more with my 7/64. Just so it's recessed on this side, recessed on that side. And there you go. That's how to put the barrel back in. Next, we're going to install our slide catch. So we need our little itty bitty spring. Okay, basically, I'm going to grab this and slide it into that groove. Being very careful not to lose it. Kind of see how I got it started in there. And then I'll use my pick. Put my finger over it, just kind of pull it the rest of the way. Next, I'm going to take my lever itself, and this is going to go in the same way we took it out. We're not going to try to put this on and then try to loop our spring around it. We're going to try to loop our spring around it first, okay? So sometimes you got to get your manual safety out of the way, kind of work this down in there, okay? And get that leg to go underneath the spring. Sometimes you can push up from behind here. Get that spring to go up over that leg. Just like that. And then we're going to rotate this around. You can see how it's still hooked up. And drop it down on the other side. Just like that. Then we'll take our pin. Goes in either way. Work that through. Just like that. Little function check. Make sure our spring is captured. Which it is. Okay, we're running out of parts here, which is a good thing. We're going to take our takedown lever. And this basically goes in through the front just like this. Okay. There's going to be some spring tension there from that insert that we put in there. Push it in, line up our holes. So we can push it all the way towards us. Rotate it just like that. Okay, and next, basically the upper is all put back together. Almost. We got our strut. That's about it. On our grip, we'll get this thing ready. We're going to put our main spring seat on that side, right here. On this other side, we're going to put that manual safety detent spring in there. The detent itself, the fin facing towards the rear, right there. Make sure it works. Now that we have that kind of together, we're going to move to our frame here. Our strut needs to be curved out and away. So when we put this on there, like I said, we got to kind of come up to like 3 o'clock. Put it over that leg. Because you can see this is kind of like an oval. So you get that little notch in it. That post, the shape of that post needs to go over that notch. And then you can kind of rotate this down. Just like that. Now, the trick, putting these two together. I've tried many different things. I had a magazine installed, which kind of kept this from wanting to go through the slot there. Can you see the slot? It wants to migrate into that slot. So, see how that hinges? Basically, when I put this together, I'm tilting it like this. So naturally that strut wants to go towards this edge of the grip module, not towards the front. Okay? So basically I'm going to grab this by the barrel. We're going to put our strut into the hole there. I'm going to bend it back like this, and then just kind of sit everything down in there. Okay? And then just kind of grab it with our hands. You can see the hole there is lined up. Basically pull back on your hammer. If you feel tension like that, you're in the right place. If your hammer like just falls back, well, if you look up inside here, you'll probably see that strut poking into the mag well there. Okay. So with that like that, I'm squeezing this together. This hole here is lined up. The rear hole is a lot easier to put together first. So whatever pin has got the most taper to it, I actually get that started in there. I'm going to get this started in here. Whatever grip you can get on there to squeeze it the best. And then we're just going to work that pin in there. Using the Delrin once you get really close. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my punch, 7/64, countersink this just a little bit. So it's countersunk there. Countersunk a little bit there. Might go a little bit more. Countersunk, countersunk. So there you go. That's the hardest one to put in. This other one, basically just push it down a little bit. Make sure your hole's lined up right here. This pin you can usually push in by hand, but make sure you're going in the hole on that plastic piece, not hammering away at this and being not lined up and then probably snapping that little plastic piece off. So I can just work it with my finger. It's headed in the right direction. You can either push it in with your pin, or you can give it a little, don't hit your takedown lever. Little tap there. Countersink it a little bit. Countersunk, countersunk. And there you go. All that we have left is our guide rod spring, or recoil spring on this one. I do this not using the slide, okay, because I don't want any of the stuff to go flying trying to put it all together. So this spring doesn't have a whole lot of tension. I mean, maybe you need help putting this back on if you don't have the grip strength, but basically pull that, collapse it, put our bushing on there, and then screw our thread protector on. And then when you're done that, we can take our 7/16 wrench, give this a little snug, just like that. And there you go. So we're going to put our slide back on. Remember, your hammer's got to be towards the rear, and you should have a lot of tension there. You can actually test it before you put it together. That way, if you got to take it back apart to get that strut lined up properly, you don't have to take it all back apart. But that's working fine and everything. We can take our slide, pull our hammer down, push our takedown lever up, put our slide on there, pull it back, drop it down, put it on, and there you go. The last thing we have to do is put our trigger shoe on. So rather than install the plastic one, we're going to go back with the Armory Craft, and I do have these on my website in black and red. Huge difference. So we're going to put that up on there. If you got the plastic one on there, it goes in the exact same way. On this one here, we would typically use blue Loctite on these screws. And again, I have an installation video showing how to install and adjust this trigger. But these are pretty long screws. We're going to run them both all the way in until they're both perfectly flush. They'll be actually recessed just a little bit. And there you go. Again, we're going to verify we're safe. No round in the chamber, no magazine, no check our breech face. Everything works fine. Next, we'll do a functions check before we return this to service. Okay, so next we're going to do a functions check on the P322. This is a little bit different than the other SIGs, so I do have the manual open to page 64, which is going to explain this all in detail for us. So first we're going to check the recoil spring function and slide travel. Okay, so what they want you to do is retract the slide completely and release. Verify the slide returns completely to the closed position, which it does. repeat the procedure. Okay, so that part works fine. Next, we're going to check the trigger mechanism and manual safety lever. So place the manual safety lever on, safety lever up. Now, like I mentioned before, this safety is, I don't like it. But because it is possible to hear that click, you think it's on. Well, guess what? It's not on. So make sure when you apply the safety on this, you're pushing all the way up. Okay. And then pull your trigger. The hammer should not fall. Okay. Place the manual safety lever off, safety down, hammer should not fall, which it didn't. Pull the trigger, hammer should fall. So that part all works fine. Next, we're going to check the slide catch lever. They want you to insert an empty magazine, so we're going to make sure that it is empty. Verify that it is empty. We don't want to chamber around on accident. We're going to install our magazine. If that installs difficult, make sure your mag well is free and clear from that strut. It's not poking its way through there, okay? So install our magazine. Now we're going to pull our slide to the rear. Pull the slide completely to the rear and release. Slide catch lever must lock slide to the rear. So as I'm coming back, let me push my hammer back so I can do this a lot slower and show you. As I bring my slide back, the follower on our magazine, okay, right now it's pushing up on our slide catch. That's its job, okay? So as we bring this back, we're going to see our slide catch pop up if it's all working properly. There you go. And it locked it to the rear, okay? So then they want you to remove the magazine, pull our slide to the rear. You should see that slide catch drop, which it did, and then release our slide, and it locks fully towards the front, okay? Next, we're going to check the magazine condition, inspect the magazine. Check the condition of the magazine tube. Okay. All looks fine in there. No obstructions or anything like that. Verify the magazine floor plate is secure. We can disassemble these magazines by removing this portion here. That's all on there nice and solid. Check for free movement of the magazine follower and spring. Run it all the way down, all the way up. That's all working fine. Insert the magazine into the pistol and remove. Okay. Check the magazine catch for positive engagement and smooth release. Okay. Basically, you want your magazines to drop out under their own weight, whether they're loaded or full. Okay. And if we had a little bit of an extension on here, we can test to make sure it's grabbing on there. Okay. So that is the, we got one more. Inspect the pistol exterior. Inspect the general condition of the pistol. Check the sights, frame, slide, and controls for damage. Verify the front and rear sights are secure. Okay, so we didn't really mess with any of those, but just give it a once-over look. Everything looks good to go. And I like to check my reset also, which they didn't have us do in the manual. So bring it out, reset, and then fires. Okay. And there you have it. That is how to do a functions check on your P322. Obviously, I have company. And really quickly, I just kind of want to go over loading the magazine, as that's a direct result of if you're having a good time with your 322 or you're hating it, okay? So it comes with this loader. You don't have to use it if you don't want. You can pull down on the follower with these two buttons, okay? So if you want to use the loader, you kind of put it down there and you pull down on the loader, which pulls down on the nubs, which pulls down on the follower. So what we don't want to do is jack this thing way down to the bottom and start dropping rounds in there, because you want them to stagger all the way up and load evenly, okay? Sometimes you can get more on one side than the other, then you're not going to be able to get 20 rounds in there, okay? When we're putting these in there, we want to basically just pull down enough. We're still going to push in through the top with our fingers, but we want to relieve some of the tension with our tool here, or just by pulling down on the nubs, enough to get one cartridge in there. We're still pushing down with our fingers, and we're sliding it towards the rear, okay? We're not pulling this down enough to where we can just drop the rounds in there, because then you're going to have feeding issues. So we're going to keep doing this as we load up our magazine. And it's a good idea sometimes to put it upside down and kind of give it a little jiggle, let things settle properly. And we're just going to load one more round here, just like that. Okay, we're going to make sure they stagger in there properly, and then you'll be able to get 20 in there. It is possible to get more than 20 in there. Obviously, SIG doesn't recommend it. That's why they call it a 20-round magazine. if you're only getting 19 in there or whatever, it's because they're not staggered properly. It still should function fine. So that's all I want to say about the magazine. If you're having a really hard time with this 322, even it says it in the manual, mostly the results are because of your magazines, whether they're dirty and they need to be maintained a little bit. They actually recommend marking your magazines so you can identify which ones are problematic. So it might be wise to get actually a couple extra 322 mags. But as it is, with the two I've had, I haven't had any problems. And there you have it. That is all about the 322, basically everything I know about it, how to completely disassemble and reassemble it as well. Like I said, these triggers are available on sigguy.com, as well as our toolkits and everything. Many different toolkits for all different pistol models, including the deluxe one that covers everything. And I might even put together a kit specifically for the 322 as well. So if you enjoy this type of video and this type of content, please search me on YouTube, SIG Guy, and like and subscribe to the channel, help the channel grow. And if you haven't been to the website in a while, sigguy.com, I'm constantly adding all kinds of stuff there, tons of stuff. I got 322 stuff on the way, so if you need some of these replacement parts, we can take care of that. And I got tons of everything else for all other SIG Sauer model pistols, including some Glock. And I'm actually adding right now a bunch of MPX stuff. I love my MPX. It's probably my third favorite SIG. So I want to offer some upgrades for people that enjoy their MPX as well. So as always, thank you very much for watching and have a great day.